Hi everyone, welcome to Elvis Presley Past, Present and Future. We will continue with another Elvis episode. In our past videos, we've actually seen Elvis's history, where his family grew up, who his family were. We've actually seen Elvis being born. We've seen who was there, how it all happened. We've seen the family move from Tupelo to Memphis. We've seen Elvis in the early years, Elvis at Humes High School, graduating Humes High School. So now let's continue on with our Elvis journey. In the summer of 1953, Elvis stopped with some friends by Meteor Recording Studio, located on 1794 Chelsea Avenue, for a private recording. Meteor was owned and operated by brothers Lester and Jules Bahari. During Elvis' short visit, Jules Bahari referred Elvis and his friends to Sam Phillips' Memphis recording studio on 706 Union Avenue to make his private record. "If I could find a white man who had the Negro sound and the Negro feel, I could make $1 billion. Sam Phillips. Elvis knew he wanted to be a singer, but he didn't know how to go about becoming one. For Elvis, there was only one reason to do the recording: to audition the folks at the recording studio, hoping they would hear enough in his voice to invite him back someday for a session. On June 13, 1953, a young shy man entered Sam Phillips' Memphis recording studio, located at 706 Union Avenue. Elvis recorded his first acetate, My Happiness. And for the B-side, That's Where Your Heartache Begins. But he wasn't too pleased the way it sounded. Maybe that's why he ended the song with That's the End, to which you can clearly hear at the end of the original recording. If he had hoped for Sam Phillips to come out of the control booth and talk to him, he was sadly disappointed. While he waited to record his acetate, he asked Marion Keisker if she knew of any groups looking for a singer. She didn't. When Elvis stopped by the studios of Sam Phillips to make his record, as a surprise for his mother, he was, in the words of Marion, a shy little woe-begone, cradling his battered, beat-up child's guitar. Marion was more than just a secretary. She once had a vibrant career in broadcasting. In the mornings, she was Kitty Kelly on WREC Radio Memphis, being broadcast from the basement studios in the Peabody Hotel. This was her first major role in radio. On leaving the station, she would report to work for Sam Phillips. During the recording of his song, Marion obviously heard something special in the voice of the young man. After he finished his recording, she asked him for his name and address and jotted it down, putting it away in the files on her desk, in case Sam ever needed a singer and wanted to get in touch with him. Marion said, "To make sure I remember which one he was, I wrote Timothy Sideburns on the paper." After chatting a while with her, he left. Convinced she had made a discovery, Marion told Sam about Elvis, but Sam brushed the comments of his secretary aside. And Elvis began waiting. And waiting. And waiting. Occasionally he would drop by the studio for small talk with Marion, whom he was very, very fond of. But then weeks and months went by, and Elvis heard nothing. After waiting over 6 months for that call that never came, Elvis entered MRS again on Monday, January 4, 1954, to record a second acetate. He recorded I'll Never Stand in Your Way and It Wouldn't Be the Same Without You. This time, Sam Phillips handled the session because Marion wasn't in the office. Like Marion, he is intrigued by this unusual looking and sounding young man. When Marion returned to the studio, she found a note on her desk saying, "Elvis Presley, good ballad singer." In later years, Sam began to take more of the credit for discovering Elvis, but in truth, Marion was alone in the office of Sun Records when Elvis recorded his first 2 songs. In many of the interviews, Sam denied that Marion was the one that Elvis recorded his first acetate for. Perhaps Sam recalled Elvis' second visit on January 4, and he's confused it with Elvis' first recording on June 13. The version of Marion is the version that Scotty Moore heard. Even years later, Elvis would be quick to remind anyone who would ask, in fact, that it was Marion, not Sam, who saw his potential. When he met Marion at JC's and invited her to his table years later, he introduced her with the words, "Without her, I wouldn't even be here." On the 30th of January 1953, a Saturday, Elvis met Dixie Locke at the Rainbow Roller Dome, located at 2879 Lamar Avenue. The two talked all evening, with Elvis driving her home at the end of the night. At Southside High School, Dixie was one of the most sought-after girls, and Elvis, never confident with women or relationships, felt reassured with her on his arm. The next day, January 31, Elvis called Dixie in order to meet with her. This time, they went to the movies. The Lockes were one step up the social ladder from the Presleys and warned their daughter of her 2 goals, love and marriage, and that maybe they were not possible with Elvis. Barely 2 weeks after their first meeting, Elvis brought Dixie home to meet his parents. It was 16th of February 1954. And almost 2 weeks later, on the 26th of February, Dixie agreed to a trial engagement. Dixie and Elvis attended the all-night gospel singing at the Ellis Auditorium together for the first time. Elvis and his parents were regular at this monthly event, an all-star gospel show that was put on by the Blackwood Brothers. On the 5th of March, Elvis and Dixie attended the annual minstrel show at Humes High School, and on the 18th of April, he and Dixie returned to Humes High School for another talent show. After the show, they had Easter dinner with Elvis's family. On Tuesday 20th of April 1954, Elvis begins to work at Crown Electric Company, which were located at 475 North Dunlap Street. He starts out driving a truck, delivering supplies to building sites. Elvis hoped he would get the chance to train to be an electrician. Elvis made a little over $1.25 an hour, which he gave to his mother. Elvis's job consisted of driving either the company's Ford F-100 pickup truck or the blue Dodge panel truck and delivering supplies to the men on the job. The Crown Electric Company was owned by Jim and Gladys Tipler. Jim Tipler recalls, "We had to put a call in to Tennessee Employment for a truck driver. We knew this lady up there and she began looking out for us. She called us one day and said she had a real nice young boy who wanted a job, needed a job badly. We told her to send him down to 475 North Dunlap, where Crown was located. We interviewed and hired him. He started by driving the truck for us, taking electrical material out on the jobs for the electricians. After a while, he started helping the electricians on the job, pulling wire, doing a bunch of odds and ends. That's where I think the story got started about him starting to become an electrician. Really, he was never an electrician, he just helped the electricians every so often. Other than his long hair, which we weren't really used to, he looked like a typical teenager. That made him a little suspicious to us, because at the time, you weren't seeing many people with long hair. He'd go out on the job and really take care of that hair. Then he'd come back in, run to the mirror, and start combing his hair. He kept that hair real nice. After he'd been working for us for a little while, and started getting to play in some of the clubs around town, he would get my wife Gladys to make appointments for him, and he started going to the beauty shop to get his hair fixed. When he first started working for us, he didn't tell us of his interest in music. But after he'd been with us about a month or so, he commented telling us all about it. He told us he would like to buy his mother a home, and that made a big impact on us. He was a young man making a statement that the first thing he wanted to do was buy his mother a home. Now and then he would bring his guitar to work and show us how to play it. Mostly, when he'd play someplace like the Bon Air and he'd tell us about it, we would all gather up a crowd and go out there and hear him. We thought that went over real good. Everyone would just get up from their tables, crowd the dance floor in front of the band, and watch him sing and shake his leg. Every once in a while, when he would come into work, he'd mess around with the guitar. My wife Gladys would tell him, "Now son, you better put that guitar down, boy. It'll be the ruining of you if you don't." Things turned out just the opposite. It's a good thing he didn't follow her advice. He was with us a good 7 or 8 months before his first record came out. One day after that first record, he said he needed some time off to go down and do a radio interview. He told us he would put in a plug for Crown Electric on the air and say he worked here. After that interview, the phones started ringing. They were really ringing. I'm sure it was because of the plug he gave us on the air. Years later, it was my wife's birthday, and Elvis was getting ready to play Vegas. We flew out. I didn't want Elvis to know we were there. I went to the maitre d' and told him I wanted a seat where Elvis couldn't miss us. The maitre d' got us a seat so close that we could lay our arm on the stage. When Elvis came out, he went to the right-hand side of the stage and talked to the people there in the front. Then he came back by us and our table. When he got near us, he got down on his knees and started shaking my hand. He put his arm around Gladys and was hugging and kissing her. Then he asked, what were we doing there? We told him it was Gladys's birthday and we'd come out to celebrate it with him. He thought that was real nice of us to come out there. He got up from kneeling and announced to the crowd, "These people here I used to drive a truck for, Mr. and Mrs. Tippler." I asked him if we could come visit backstage after the show. He told us to come on. There we talked to him and Mr. Presley for about 15 minutes. He never forgot old friends. I went down to his place at Graceland 2 or 3 times. Once, when I was head of the Electrical Contractors Association, the group came to Memphis for its convention. They asked if I could arrange a group visit to Graceland. I arranged it with Elvis. We took 3 buses down there. One of the drivers, seeing dollars dance in his head, asked Elvis if he could begin to bring his own tools down there on the grounds, and Elvis told him, "No, sir. If it wasn't for Mr. Tippler, you wouldn't be in this yard now." He'd always do things for me like that if I asked. We thought of much as him as if he were our only son. I don't think anyone else would have thought more of their own son than we thought of Elvis. During the next month, Elvis was busy with his girlfriend, Dixie. They did a lot of activities together. In May, they attended the annual Cotton Carnival, where Elvis ran into his friend, Ronald Smith. Ronnie played as a guitarist in Eddie Bond's band, who was already established on this music scene in Memphis. Ronnie knew that Elvis could sing pop because they had played 3 or 4 car lot gigs. So Ronnie asked Elvis if he wanted to sing pop with Eddie down at the hi-hat. And Elvis jumped at the chance. He was excited. That big break he had been seeking might finally be at hand. 19-year-old Elvis came in with his girlfriend Dixie to audition for the band. While drinking cokes, Elvis waited nervously to go on stage. Bond came to the table to say hello. He asked Elvis what he did for a living, and Elvis said he drove a truck for Crown Electric. Dixie was embarrassed for him because Elvis couldn't stop drumming his fingers on the table. Soon he took to the stage and sang 2 songs, accompanying himself on an acoustic guitar. After the audition, the board members came to Eddie and told him, "That greasy-haired kid is not singing in here. Either he goes, or all of you do." Eddie felt bad for Elvis, but he could not jeopardise their jobs, so he had to let him go. Bond told Elvis to stick with driving a truck, because you're never going to make it as a singer. Eddie remembers that incident. After they heard Elvis and saw Elvis, they came to me and said, "If you don't get rid of that greasy-haired redneck, we'll get rid of you." I was making $1,500 a week at the time. Not long out of high school. That was big money in those days. I wasn't about to give that up. What else could I do? So I fired Elvis. I'm probably one of only 2 people in the world who can legitimately lay claim to having fired Elvis. Not long after that, Elvis recorded his first song, "That's Alright Mama," and headed toward becoming a legend. Eddie Bond continued. After his first success, the owner of the hi-hat came to me saying, "We might let him back if he wants to come back. Go and ask him." I went to Elvis and gave him the offer. Elvis kind of laughed and said, "Sure, I'll come back to the hi-hat, but it's going to cost him $2,500 a week, not $1,500 a week." In May of 1954, Sam Phillips headed to Nashville to listen to a new song. Red Wortham had an acetate of a song called "Without You," a simple but sentimental ballad. When Sam returned from Nashville, he had in mind to record this song with a singer which had the right feeling for the song, and he remembered the guy who was a good ballad singer. Elvis made a 3rd recording on June 9 in the studio, but nothing about it is known. But a bill exists with the date, and that's the bill there. So that's a recording that Elvis made. You see June 9 up the top. No details of what the song was, but he did the recording and paid for it. It was Saturday, June 26, when Elvis got a call from Marion, who asked him to come over to the studio. Elvis stated in later years that he was there before she put the phone down. Sam and Elvis worked the whole afternoon on the song, but for some reason Elvis didn't do the song the way Phillips wanted it. So Sam let him sing whatever song he knew and wanted to do. After 3 hours, Elvis was exhausted. The session was a failure. But Sam still heard something in the voice of this young man that intrigued him. During the summertime of this year, a young guitarist frequently stopped by MRS to chat with Sam Phillips. He had a band named the Starlight Wranglers. 2 months earlier, Sam had released their song, My Kind of Carrying On. This guitarist's name was Scotty Moore. Scotty had been talking to Sam for weeks to figure out where he was headed in Sam's studio. Marion, Sam, and Scotty went next door to Taylor's Cafe to chat. Sam remembers the young guy who recorded some months earlier had told Marion to dig out his telephone number. dig out the number of this young guy and his name and give it to Scotty to check out the young man's ability. Later that afternoon, Scotty called Elvis at home, but Elvis wasn't there. Gladys Presley told him that Elvis had gone to a movie and that she would make sure that he called when he got back. And Elvis did. Returning Scotty's call, Scotty explained that he was working for Sam Phillips and asked Elvis if he would be interested in coming over to his house for an informal audition. Elvis agreed, and they arranged to meet the next day, July 4, after lunch. Scotty wanted his friend Bill Black, bass player in his band, to come over to the house and listen to Elvis as well. After Elvis was gone, Scotty asked Bill what he thought of Elvis. Bill wasn't too impressed. After Bill left, Scotty phoned Sam to give him his report, and, based on Scotty's recommendation, Phillips called Elvis later that afternoon and set up an audition for Monday night at the studio. The remarkable date was July 5, 1954. July 5, 1954. That Monday night after work, Scotty, Bill and Elvis showed up at the studio. The idea was to see if Elvis what he could do, not to make a record. First came the small talk, and to question Elvis about what songs he knew and what songs Billy and Scotty knew. They started with Harbour Lights, a song that had been a hit for Bing Crosby years ago. The next song they tried was I Love You Because. Elvis, Scotty and Bill worked on the material all the time, encouraged by Sam Phillips to keep experimenting with different songs, arrangements and approaches until they might just hit on something that had that crossover appeal. Not that Sam had any idea as to what that might be, but they did one ballad after another. As the night wore on, it became obvious they were going nowhere, but no one would give up. Sam Phillips and Scotty Moore wanted to look for things that they could do in a medium to up-tempo beat. Sam Phillips had to approach this to try to get the attention of younger people, and he knew that tempo had a lot to do with that back then, rather than just a great lyric and beautiful melody. Around midnight, they took a break. It was late, and everyone had to go to work the next day. Scotty was in the process of packing up his guitar. Bill had already thrown down his old bass. The session was all but over. Suddenly Elvis jumped up and started playing his guitar, beating the hell out of it, and started singing a blues song that had been recorded by Arthur Big Boy Crudup in 1940 called That's Alright Mama. Clowning around was definitely second nature to both. So Bill jumped up on his feet and began playing, and Scotty also joined in. They were falling in right behind Elvis. The door to the control room was open. The mics were still on. Sam was in the control room when he got caught off guard, and the musicians got his attention immediately. Sam sensed that the patience part of his job was over. This was something truly unexpected, something original. It was the something different he'd been looking for. Stopping the group mid-verse, he asked them to start over as he pushed the record button on the tape machine. Relaxed and loose, at last, Elvis injected a bright, breezy, more melodic feel into this traditional blues, and with only two guitars and the slap of Bill's bass, a sound came through that got Sam's eyes dancing. They were making a record. Sam Phillips recalled, "It could have been that it wouldn't have sold 10 copies, but that was what I was looking for. There was no question in my mind. I didn't give a damn what the song was. That was the sound, the feel, even the tempo. We didn't do much to that song. Man, We did a couple, maybe 3 or 4 takes. And then we had something that I'd been looking for so long. When I heard That's Alright Mama, it opened a whole new door. Elvis being as young as he was, I thought, my God, this guy knows That's Alright Mama, the big boy crowd-up hit that had done its thing 7 years before. On the evening of July 6, Scotty, Elvis and Bill returned to the studio to pick up where they left off after recording That's Alright Mama. Sam told them they had half a record. They needed to come up with a B-side. They ran through a number of songs that included Billy Eckstine's 1949 hit Blue Moon. Elvis once again tried everything he could think of, but nothing clicked. After everyone left that night, Sam called a local disc jockey, Dewey Phillips, who had a daily 9 to midnight show called Red Hot and Blue on radio station WHBQ, which broadcast from the downtown Hotel Keisker. Though the two men weren't related, they were practically inseparable. They did everything together, personally as well as professionally. Before Sam opened his MRS studio, he started his initial record label in partnership with Dewey. Dewey Phillips later would continue to be an unofficial silent partner in Sam's musical operation until his death. Sam told Dewey he had something he needed him to hear. After Dewey finished his show that night, he stopped by at Sam's studio on his way home. Sam had an arrangement going with Dewey. He would give Dewey some copies of tapes or acetates before they were released as a record. If Dewey liked them and played them on his show, Sam could judge by audience reaction how many records to press. That night, Sam played That's Alright Mama for Dewey for nearly 2 hours. They drank beer and listened to that one record. Sam told Dewey, it's not black, it's not white, it's not pop, it's not country, and played it over and over and over again. Dewey sat there and listened, stone-faced. He left the studio without commenting on the record. Early the next morning, he called Sam and told him it was the damnedest record he had ever heard. He asked for a copy to play on Red Hot and Blue. Later that day, Sam Phillips made an acetate and left it for Dewey at the radio station. Then he called Elvis and told him to be sure to listen to Dewey's show that night. Elvis told his parents about the show, but Elvis ducked out of the house and went to a movie at Suzar's before it started. He didn't want to hear it. The phones rang off the hook and all hell broke loose. At the request of his listeners, Dewey played it and played over and over again. It is said he played the Elvis song 7, 10, 14 times in a row. He then took a break and started playing the record all over again. The song was an instant hit. Dewey got Elvis's phone number from Sam and called his home. Gladys answered the phone and told him Elvis had gone to the movies. Dewey told her, get your cotton picking son down to the station. Within minutes, Gladys and Vernon had rounded up Elvis and got him to the station. He was so nervous he shook all over. Elvis was afraid that he would freeze up by being interviewed by Dewey. But Dewey had a clever, if not altogether honest plan to pull off the interview without a hitch. He played a few records over the air and left the microphone on while engaging Elvis in casual conversation under the pretext of preparing the actual interview. Elvis said to him, Mr. Phillips, I don't know nothing about being interviewed. Dewey's advice was simple. Just don't say nothing dirty, son. Dewey asked Elvis where he went to high school, and Elvis said Humes, which communicated to the audience that he was in fact white. Many of those that heard the song thought it must have been performed by a black singer, knowing that Dewey Phillips played a lot of coloured music. After a few minutes of such chit-chat, Dewey thanked Elvis for his time. Elvis, confused, asked, "Aren't you going to interview me?" And Dewey replied, he already had. Elvis broke out in a cold sweat. This night was July 7, 1954. When Elvis, Scotty and Bill returned to the studio the next day, July 8, they were local celebrities among Dewey Phillips' hip radio listeners, but they still needed a B-side for the record. Over the next days, they worked hard to get a second song for the B-side. Elvis knew the bluegrass music of Bill Monroe, and they tried his song, Blue Moon of Kentucky. After an early take, Sam enthused, "Fine, man, hell, that's different. That's just fine. That's a pop song now." With a few more takes and a little more refinement, the song edged even further from its country roots into the domain of rhythm and blues. Fewer than 20,000 copies were sold. It did not chart nationally, but reached number 4 in Memphis. Sam Phillips quickly made some acetates and gave copies to Dewey Phillips at WHBO, Uncle Richard at WMPS, and Sleepy-Eyed John Leppy at WHHM. Sleepy-Eyed John, whose afternoon fare of country western music on WHHM made him one of the few Memphis DJs whose popularity approached Dewey Phillips. Leppy was a highly talented individual whose misfortune it was to be a contemporary of Dewey Phillips. He still had hordes of devoted pure country fans who wanted no part of rock and roll and thought Elvis Presley sounded entirely too black. He didn't play either side until some days, maybe weeks later. And then he only played the B-side, Blue Moon of Kentucky, which he would proceed to make fun of. He would do nothing but pan the record and make fun of Elvis. Things got so bad that Vernon Presley grew angry. Sam Phillips said, "Now, Vernon seldom got mad, but he came by my studio and said, 'I'm going up there and I'm going to whip this son of a bitch's ass.'" In truth, Sleepy-Eyed John was taken with the more countrified sound of Blue Moon of Kentucky. Leppy boosted Elvis's country career, following him as much as everyone. Looking after Elvis's initial popularity, he was responsible for booking several gigs for him at the Eagle's Nest, a local nightclub where he frequently promoted bands. The enthusiastic response to Elvis' Sun record inspired Sam Phillips to sign his new star to a recording contract. The signing took place on July 26, 1954 at the Peabody Hotel. A copy of the signed document, which established for Elvis a 3% royalty in record sales, is now on display at the Peabody's memorabilia room. "That's Alright Mama" was pouring out all over the airways. Dewey and Sam set up a plan. Elvis and Scotty and Bill would play in a Hillbilly show that was going on at the Bonaire Club, and there would be other acts playing. And Sam got Elvis, Scotty Moore and Bill Black added to the bill. At that point, they only had 2 songs under their collective belts. 2 songs. That's Alright and Blue Moon of Kentucky. So, they would perform those 2 songs. Sam Phillips described the crowd at the Bonaire as pure redneck, and Elvis stuck out like a sore thumb with his greasy pompadour. How would he go over live? Although Sam would later say that Elvis came off really good. Elvis was crushed by the experience. He said to Sam afterwards that he felt like he failed. Sam tried to reassure him. And although he knew that Elvis still needed more experience, he said that Elvis looked miserable on stage. He also looked nervous to enjoy any moment of it at all. There was hostility in the crowd too towards this newcomer. Who was this singing hillbilly that had a blues sound to him? This was not a disaster, but Elvis was sensitive. Elvis was a mystery, not only to himself, but to Sam, Dewey, Scotty, and Bill, and every established music at that joint. He was completely new, untried, and didn't look like anyone else. Who did this young thug think he was? Coming on their stage, playing their music, but in his own way. Sam was determined to get the boy out in front of people, so he called Bob Neal and had Bob add the trio to the Hillbilly Hoedown that was going to be happening at the time at Overton Park Shell, an outdoor amphitheatre, one of Memphis's biggest and most popular live entertainment venues. There will be a ton of musicians on the bill, and Slim Whitman was the star of the night. Bob Neal added the trio to the list of acts. On July 31st, Sam and the others got a glimpse of the phenomenon that Elvis was soon to become. On this night, Elvis, Scotty and Bill performed as the opening act for yodeling country music star Slim Whitman at one of Memphis's biggest and most popular live entertainment venues, the Overton Shell. Everyone gathered at the Overton Shell Park. Elvis drove over with Dixie, and Dixie went out into the lawn to sit down with Mr. and Mrs. Presley. Elvis stood on the steps behind the shell, having a nervous breakdown. That's where Sam Phillips found him. Musicians were milling around, crowding it up backstage, and it was a full bill of performers, and it felt like all Memphis had gathered. Sam said, when I got there, Elvis was standing on the steps at the back of the shell, looking kind of pitiful. He just grabbed me, and he said, "Man, I'm so glad to see you, Mr. Phillips. I don't know what I'm going to do." I said, "Look, Elvis, we'll find out whether they like you or not." And then I said, "They're going to love you." Now, I didn't know that, and if you want, you can call me a liar or a fake for saying something I didn't know to be true, but I believed that once he started to sing, and they saw him, and once they heard that voice and that beautiful simplicity of what those three musicians were putting down, that it was going to be good. The show began with Elvis, Scotty, and Bill. They entered the stage, and Scotty remembers that Elvis was shaking so badly that he could almost hear Elvis's knees knocking together. Elvis held onto the mic, and Scotty remembers that he gripped it so hard that his knuckles turned white. They had played that one live show, but this environment was something else altogether. There were 4,000 people out there. The three men had only just met a month before. They only knew 2 songs. This was insane pressure. They started with That's Alright Mama, and also performed Blue Moon of Kentucky. Before Slim Whitman began his performance, Scotty remembers Elvis suddenly going up onto the balls of his feet, his body quivering all over, and a roar went through the crowd, and they went crazy. Elvis had no concept of what had happened, and when he heard the crowd response, initially he thought they were laughing at him. Bill Black was a real showman, and on their second number, Blue Moon of Kentucky, he turned the bass sideways and rode it like a horse, slapping on it. The crowd went nuts. It spurred Elvis on. When they came off stage, Elvis was confused about what was going on and asked, "Why are people yelling at me?" He had to be told that the crowd was screaming for him. He didn't get it. Bob Neal told Elvis that the crowd went wild because he was jiggling his leg. Elvis was very nervous for his performance, and he did not know he was shaking his body in a sexual way. Scotty Moore said, "We didn't know what was going on. When all those people started screaming and hollering, the crowd was screaming for an encore." Later in the show, the trio came back to perform the first two songs again. And they also sang "I'll Never Let You Go, Little Darling." It is difficult to express just how quick a study he was. In 10 minutes, in the middle of a high-stress situation, the highest stress yet for Elvis, except for maybe first opening that door of the Memphis recording service, he understood his own power. He didn't fight it, question it, or second-guess it. He went back out there with his newfound knowledge and immediately used it on purpose. It takes some performers 15 years of live performances to really understand their own role up there and how in charge they are and how to conduct an audience and control them. Elvis got that memo in 10 minutes. Bob Neal watched the encore from backstage and watched Elvis jump around jiggling and quaking, now doing it confidently and on purpose. Having a ball, and could not believe that this was the same shy boy with the debilitating stutter backstage only months earlier. Nobody could have seen that. The sex thing was about to come exploding out of this young boy. Nobody could have predicted that. It was all Elvis. It was who he was on stage. He figured it out instantaneously. Bob Neal said later he just automatically did things right. Dixie Locke, watching from the audience, had an odd experience watching all of this. She knew her boyfriend. She had seen him in action, playing for her and her friends, just horsing around. She was familiar with his constantly jiggling leg. It had driven her insane on their dates when he wouldn't sit still. Her parents said to her after their first meeting with Elvis, "Can that boy sit still?" But to watch him do the same thing in front of a crowd and watching the Memphis girls erupt into spontaneous screams, the first girls ever to scream at Elvis, she wondered what was going on. She felt angry and possessive. She wanted to tell the girls to leave him alone. She felt lonely, sitting out there watching him. Suddenly, he didn't belong to her. But she was happy for him too, because afterwards, he was elated. He didn't sleep for 2 days. The adrenaline was still buzzing through him. Dixie said later, "I don't think he was prepared for what was about to happen. He knew this is what he wanted to do, and that this was breaking for him, but I don't ever think he thought that anybody would just go that crazy." Sam Phillips on Elvis. Elvis was, believe it or not, probably one of the most timid people in the world. Just plain timid. And I think that was one of the things about him that he kind of tried to hide a little bit. That little insecure boy in him, or just something, somehow or other, you felt it. He was genuinely a courteous person and deep down very respectful of anyone just a few years older than he or anyone who had a little bit more money than he. He was just really being educated. He was educating himself on how to deal with people and grow a little more comfortable with people and get his self-esteem up. Honestly, bless his beautiful heart, there was never more a handsome man than Elvis Presley. Elvis had sex written all over him from the very day he walked in the door. I don't mean anything about him being good looking, because he wasn't really as good looking then as what he would develop into later on. But he had sex written all over him, and the right kind. When this man opened his mouth, you saw sex. When you saw him on stage, you saw sex. You could not take your eyes off him, and this was even as a male. I don't want to use the word charisma, but this guy, and I'm talking about him in a total personal way, in addition to a fantastic talent, as far as his singing was concerned, he had a certain ability for contact. And to a measured degree, he could give you that sexual feel or whatever feel was needed if a song indicated it had that potential. But there was also a tangible love of crooner, pop and country gospel in the creases of this 19-year-old's remarkable art. We all admire the persistent individual who can spot a diamond in the rough, who has the vision to see great value in someone or something that everyone else has overlooked, like Sam Phillips. Conversely, we love to jeer the fool who lets a valuable gem slip through his fingers, even if nobody else realised its worth that at the time either. Eddie Bond. So it was with Elvis Presley. It was far from apparent during Elvis's early adulthood that he was destined to become one of the most popular entertainers the world had ever seen. And there we go. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned for the next episode. We will continue on Elvis's early career. Don't forget to like, press the subscribe button, and comment. Have a good week, guys. See you later. Bye.